The morning started like any other morning in the command center of the Galactic Dominion Empire. Commander Taman sat at his control station, reviewing the daily reports from across 12 star systems. Coffee steam rose from his cup as he scrolled through the usual updates about mining operations, tax collections, and the occasional rebellion that needed crushing. Then the alarm sounded, not the gentle ping of a routine message, but the deep, urgent tone that meant something truly unusual had happened. Taman set down his coffee and turned to face the main screen. The communications officer, a young woman named Hai-Jin, looked up from her console with wide eyes. Sir, we have received a signal from Sector 7 Alpha. Unknown origin, unknown species. Taman raised an eyebrow. His 15 years of service to the Empire, new species were rare. Most of the galaxy had already been mapped, conquered, or destroyed. Finding someone new was like discovering a hidden room in your own house. Put it on the main screen, he ordered. The signal was simple but clear. Mathematical patterns that showed intelligence. Basic physics concepts that proved the senders understood the universe around them. Most interesting of all, what appeared to be cultural information, music, art, and something the translators were calling entertainment broadcasts. Where exactly is this coming from? Kamen asked. Hai-Jin worked at her console for a moment. Small blue planet in the outer rim. Third planet from a yellow star. The inhabitants called themselves humans and their world Earth. Timon studied the data flowing across the screen. The humans seemed to have basic space technology, but nothing that would threaten the Empire. Their population was significant, but not overwhelming. Their military appeared to be divided into many small groups rather than one unified force. In other words, they looked like perfect candidates for conquest. Prepare a first contact fleet, Taman commanded. Standard protocol. We will assess their potential for submission or elimination. Within hours, 5 Imperial ships departed for the human homeworld. Taman commanded the lead vessel, a sleek destroyer called the Iron Will. His crew was experienced in first contact situations. They knew the routine well. Step 1, arrive with overwhelming force to demonstrate Imperial power. Step 2, demand to speak with the planetary leadership. Step 3, deliver the standard ultimatum. Step 4, wait for surrender or prepare for bombardment. It was a system that had worked flawlessly for over 1,000 years across 40 different species. There was no reason to think these humans would be any different. The journey to Earth took 3 days at faster than light speed. During the trip, Taman studied everything his intelligence officers could gather about the human species. It seemed remarkably similar to several other species the Empire had encountered. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. They built cities, had governments, and created art. But there were some odd things in their cultural broadcasts. The humans seemed to spend a lot of time making fun of their own leaders. They created entire entertainment programs dedicated to mocking authority figures. They had something called comedy that appeared to be organized mockery for the purpose of making people laugh. Tay-Men found this puzzling but not concerning. Many primitive species had unusual customs before they learned proper respect for imperial authority. When the fleet arrived at Earth, they positioned themselves in high orbit where every human on the planet could see them. The ships were designed to look intimidating. Dark metal hulls covered in weapon ports and armor plating. Running lights that pulsed like angry eyes. Engine exhausts that glowed with barely contained power. The psychological effect was usually immediate. Most species would panic at the sight of unknown warships appearing in their sky. Emergency broadcasts would flood their communication networks. Leaders would demand meetings. Fear would spread like wildfire. But the human response was different. Instead of panic, there was curiosity. Human news broadcasts showed people pointing at the sky and taking pictures. Some humans even gathered in groups to watch the Imperial ships through telescopes. A few were holding signs that appeared to say, "Welcome to Earth," in several different human languages. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Minho from the communication station, "we are receiving a transmission from the planet surface." "Put it through," Taimin ordered. The main screen flickered and showed a human woman sitting at what appeared to be a desk. She had short black hair and wore a simple dark blue uniform. Behind her, Taimin could see other humans working at various stations, but none of them seemed particularly worried. "Greetings," the woman said in clear, calm tones. "I am Ambassador Ji-Woo Kim, speaking for the United Nations of Earth. We have been monitoring your arrival and would like to welcome you to our solar system." Taimin was surprised by her composure. Most species trembled during first contact with the Empire. This human seemed as relaxed as if she were greeting dinner guests. "I am Commander Taimin of the Galactic Dominion Empire," he replied, using his most authoritative voice. "Your species has been selected for evaluation. We'll prepare to receive representatives of the Empire for the purpose of discussing your future relationship with our domain." Ji-Woo nodded politely. "Of course, Commander. We would be honored to meet with your representatives. May I ask what type of meeting you had in mind?" This was also unusual. Most species simply accepted whatever the Empire demanded. They did not ask questions about format or procedure. "The Empire will determine the appropriate format," Taimin said. "You will be informed of our requirements." "Certainly," Ji-Woo replied. "However, I should mention that our planet's leadership would like to invite your supreme leader to join us for what we call a cultural exchange dinner before any formal proceedings begin. We believe that understanding each other's customs can help prevent misunderstandings." Taimin felt his mouth fall open slightly. No species had ever invited the Supreme Overlord to dinner. Most had never even dared to suggest that the Supreme Overlord should visit their world personally. "You are requesting an audience with Supreme Overlord Kung Su himself?" Taimin asked. "He is available and interested," Ji-Woo said with a smile. "We understand he must be very busy running a galactic empire, but we thought he might enjoy experiencing human hospitality before we discuss business matters." The communications channel went quiet for a moment as Taimin tried to process what he had just heard. The humans were treating Imperial conquest like a business meeting. They were offering to cook dinner for the most powerful being in the galaxy. They seemed to think this was all perfectly normal. "I will convey your message to the Supreme Overlord," Taimin said, finally. "Wonderful," Ji-Woo replied. "We look forward to hearing from you soon. And Commander, thank you for being so professional. First contact can be stressful, but you have made this very pleasant." The transmission ended, leaving Taimin staring at a blank screen. In 15 years of Imperial service, no one had ever thanked him for conducting a conquest. No one had ever called the process pleasant. He turned to his communications officer. "Send a priority message to the Imperial Palace. Tell Supreme Overlord Kung Su that we have encountered something unprecedented." As the message traveled across space toward the Empire's capital, Taimin could not shake the feeling that this conquest was going to be different from all the others. The humans had responded to Imperial power with politeness and dinner invitations. He had no idea that this was only the beginning of the most unusual first contact in galactic history. Supreme Overlord Kung Su read Commander Taimin's report 3 times before he believed it. In his 1,000 years of ruling the Galactic Dominion Empire, no species had ever invited him to dinner. Most could barely speak in his presence without falling to their knees in terror. But these humans were different. They had looked at his mighty fleet and responded with curiosity instead of fear. They had met his commander's ultimatum with politeness and hospitality. Most shocking of all, they seemed to think having dinner together was a normal way to begin conquest negotiations. Kyung-soo stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, watching Earth grow larger on the main screen. Behind him stretched the largest armada he had assembled in decades. 500 warships of various sizes, each one capable of destroying cities. The combined firepower could turn the entire planet into dust within hours. Yet the humans below continued their daily lives as if nothing unusual was happening. Their communication networks showed normal traffic. Their aircraft continued regular flight patterns. Some humans were even holding viewing parties to watch the Imperial fleet through telescopes. "My lord," said Admiral So-young, his chief military advisor, "perhaps we should reconsider this approach. The humans' behavior suggests they may not understand the seriousness of their situation." Kyung-soo adjusted his elaborate black cape and turned to face her. His armor caught the light from the ship's displays, making him look even more imposing than usual. "Are you suggesting the Supreme Overlord of 40 star systems cannot handle a dinner invitation from primitives?" "Of course not, my lord. I simply worry that their casual attitude might be some form of psychological warfare we have not encountered before." The Supreme Overlord considered this possibility. He had conquered species that tried to fight him with weapons, others that attempted to hide, and a few that had tried to negotiate. But none had ever tried to feed him. "Prepare my personal shuttle," he commanded. "These humans want to play games. They will learn that the Supreme Overlord does not lose." 2 hours later, Kyung-soo's shuttle descended toward the coordinates the humans had provided. He expected to land at some kind of government building or military facility. Instead, his pilot reported that the landing site appeared to be a civilian area in what the humans called New York City. The building the humans had chosen looked nothing like the palaces or command centers where the Supreme Overlord usually received surrenders. It was a modest structure with bright lights around the entrance and a sign that read the Laugh Track Comedy Club. "My lord," said Captain Dong-woo, who commanded the Supreme Overlord's personal guard, "this location seems inappropriate for formal surrender ceremonies." Kyung-soo studied the building through his shuttle's sensors. Hundreds of humans were gathering outside, but they did not look like government officials or military personnel. They appeared to be ordinary citizens, and many of them seemed excited rather than terrified. "Perhaps this is how humans conduct official business," the Supreme Overlord said, though he did not sound convinced. When the shuttle landed, Captain Dong-woo and his elite guards formed a protective formation around their leader. Kyung-soo emerged from the craft in his full ceremonial armor, cape billowing dramatically in the earth breeze. His presence had made entire armies surrender without a fight. The humans, watching from behind safety barriers, began taking pictures. Ambassador Ji-woo approached with a small group of other humans. She wore the same simple uniform as before, but now she carried a small bouquet of yellow flowers. "Supreme Overlord Kyung-soo," she said with a respectful bow. "Welcome to Earth. Thank you for accepting our invitation." She offered him the flowers. "These are called sunflowers. They are native to our planet and represent friendship in human culture." Kyung-soo stared at the flowers for a long moment. No one had ever given him flowers before. Most species offered tribute in the form of precious metals or advanced technology. A few had tried bribes of rare art or exotic foods, but simple flowers as a gesture of friendship was completely new. "This is acceptable," he said finally, taking the bouquet. His guards looked confused, but said nothing. Ji-woo smiled and gestured toward the building. "If you would follow me, we have prepared a special evening for you and your staff. We thought you might enjoy experiencing something uniquely human before we discuss more serious matters." As they walked toward the entrance, Kyung-soo noticed more details about the building that puzzled him. The walls were covered with pictures of humans making strange facial expressions. Many appeared to be laughing or smiling in exaggerated ways. There were also posters advertising something called open mic night and comedy shows every weekend. Inside, The building was even more confusing. Instead of a formal meeting room or throne room, there was a large space filled with small tables and chairs. All the seating was arranged to face a raised platform with a microphone stand. Hundreds of humans filled the room, talking quietly among themselves and drinking various beverages. "What is this place?" Kung Su asked. "This is what we call a comedy club," Ji Woo explained. "It is where humans come to laugh and enjoy entertainment. We thought you might find it interesting to see how we spend our leisure time." The Supreme Overlord was escorted to a large table at the center of the room. His guards took positions around him, their hands resting on their weapons. But the humans in the audience seemed more interested in their drinks and conversations than in the heavily armed aliens in their midst. "My lord," whispered Admiral Saw Young, "this appears to be some kind of entertainment venue rather than a government facility." "I can see that," Kang Su replied. He was beginning to wonder if the humans understood what was supposed to happen during a conquest. Perhaps this is a test of some kind. Ji Woo took the stage and approached the microphone. The room, gradually, became quiet as the human audience turned their attention toward her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we have very special guests with us tonight. Please welcome Supreme Overlord Kung Su and the representatives of the Galactic Dominion Empire." The humans applauded politely. Some raised their drinks in a gesture that appeared to be some kind of salute. A few called out "Welcome to Earth" in friendly voices. Kung-Su acknowledged the greeting with a slight nod. This was already the strangest conquest ceremony he had ever attended, and it had barely begun. "Now," Ji Woo continued, "before we get to tonight's main entertainment, I thought I would share some observations about our visitors. You see, the Supreme Overlord arrived this morning with the most impressive entrance I have ever witnessed." She paused and looked directly at King Su. "He brought 500 warships, announced his intention to evaluate us for conquest, and demanded that we prepare for surrender, all while wearing the most magnificent cape I have seen in my entire diplomatic career." A few humans in the audience chuckled softly. "But the best part," Ji Woo said, her voice taking on a slightly different tone, "was when his commander delivered the ultimatum with such dramatic flair that I thought we were being invaded by a theater company." More humans began to laugh. Kung Su felt a strange sensation in his stomach. The humans were not treating his arrival as a terrifying display of overwhelming power. They were treating it as entertainment, and they seemed to find it amusing. Ambassador Ji Woo stood at the microphone, looking directly at Supreme Overlord Kung Su with a smile that made him deeply uncomfortable. In his 1,000 years of rule, no one had ever smiled at him like that. It was not the forced smile of fear or the fake smile of someone trying to gain favor. It was the genuine smile of someone who was about to have fun. "You know," Ji Woo continued, her voice carrying easily through the comedy club, "when someone arrives at your planet with 500 warships, you expect certain things. Maybe some dramatic music. Perhaps some threatening speeches about resistance being futile." The human audience chuckled appreciatively. Several of them glanced toward Kung Su's table, but their expressions showed curiosity rather than terror. "What we got," Ji Woo said, raising her voice slightly, "was even better. We got the full theatrical experience." She stepped away from the microphone stand and began walking across the small stage. First, the ships arranged themselves in perfect formation. It's very impressive, very intimidating, like a cosmic ballet of doom. More laughter rippled through the crowd. Kyung Su felt his jaw tighten. His fleet formations were strategic positioning, designed to maximize psychological impact and tactical advantage. They were not entertainment. Then Ji Woo continued, "We received the official communication, and, oh my goodness, the delivery was magnificent." She cleared her throat and straightened her posture, taking on an exaggerated, serious expression. When she spoke again, Her voice had dropped to match the commanding tone Commander Taman had used during first contact. Your species has been selected for evaluation, but you will prepare to receive representatives of the Empire for the purpose of discussing your future relationship with our domain. The human audience burst into laughter. Several people applauded. Someone in the back called out, "Do it again." Supreme Overlord Kyungsu felt something he had never experienced before in his entire existence. His face grew warm. His breathing became slightly faster. Deep in his chest, something twisted uncomfortably. He was embarrassed. "But wait," Jiwoo said, holding up her hand for quiet. "It gets better, because apparently we were not sufficiently impressed by the standard conquest speech. So they sent us the Supreme Overlord himself." She gestured toward Kyungsu's table with obvious delight. "Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever seen such a dramatic entrance? The personal shuttle with the escort fighters, the ceremonial armor. That probably takes 3 people to put on, and that cape. That magnificent, billowing, absolutely impossible to walk normally in cape." The laughter was getting louder. Kyungsu looked around the room and saw hundreds of human faces, all showing the same expression of pure amusement. They were laughing at him, not with fear, not with nervous energy, cued, but with genuine joy at his expense. Captain Dongwu leaned close to his leader's ear. "My lord, should we remove the human from the stage?" Su said quietly. He was fascinated despite his growing discomfort. "Let her continue." Jiwoo had moved back to the microphone. "Now, I want to be clear," she said. "We truly appreciate the effort that went into this presentation. The attention to detail is remarkable. The costume design alone must have taken months." She paused and looked directly at the Supreme Overlord again. "But I have to ask, and please forgive me if this seems rude, but do you ever trip on that cape? 'Cause it looks like it weighs more than I do?" The audience exploded with laughter. Several people were wiping tears from their eyes. One elderly human was laughing so hard he appeared to be having trouble breathing. Admiral Soyoung half rose from her chair. "This is intolerable," she whispered. "Oh. No one mocks the Supreme Overlord. No one." But Kyungsu remained seated, his eyes fixed on the human woman who had just done the impossible. She had looked at his 1,000-year empire of fear and decided it was funny. "And another thing," Jiwoo continued, clearly enjoying herself now. "What is it with evil overlords and dramatic speeches? Is there a school somewhere that teaches this? Advanced Threatening 101? How to make simple statements sound ominous?" She adopted the serious pose again and deepened her voice. "Behold, for I have come to evaluate your species for potential submission to our mighty domain." She paused and returned to her normal voice. "Oh, in regular person language. Hi. We are here to decide if we want to conquer you or blow you up." The laughter reached a new level. Even some of Kyungsu's own guards were struggling to maintain their serious expressions. One of them, a young soldier named Jae-ho, quickly looked away when he caught himself almost smiling. At that moment, another human joined Jae-woo on stage. This one was a thin man with an easy smile who introduced himself as Han Sol. "Thank you, Jiwoo, for that wonderful opening," he said. "But I think we need to address the real question here." Okay, he turned to face Kyungsu's table directly. "Your Overlordness, and please correct me if I am using the wrong title, but I have to know, how do you get anything done with that outfit?" Han began pacing the stage like he was genuinely puzzled. "I mean, the armor looks heavy. The cape must get caught indoors. And do not even get me started on that helmet. Can you see properly out of that thing? Because if I were planning to conquer a galaxy, I would want full peripheral vision." The human audience was now laughing continuously. Some were slapping their tables. Others were leaning on each other for support. "In the throne," Hansa continued, pointing toward the elaborate chair that had been brought from King Su's shuttle. That thing has more moving parts than a spaceship. What happens if it breaks down in the middle of a surrender ceremony? Do you have repair technicians for furniture? Is there a warranty? Supreme Overlord Kung Su found himself looking at his throne with new eyes. Han Sol was right. The chair was ridiculously complex. It took nearly 5 minutes to extend all the mechanical decorations when he sat down. Several times in the past, parts of it had indeed broken during important meetings. But here is what really gets me, Han Sol said, building to what appeared to be his main point. You traveled across the galaxy with 500 warships to personally oversee the conquest of one small planet. That is like bringing a full orchestra to play a happy birthday at a child's party. The laughter reached a crescendo. Several humans were now applauding as well as laughing. The sound filled the comedy club and seemed to echo in ways that defied the room's acoustics. For the first time in 1,000 years, Supreme Overlord Kung Su questioned his methods, not because someone had challenged his power or threatened his empire, because someone had pointed out that his approach might be slightly ridiculous, and the truly terrifying part was that they might be right. The laughter from the comedy club reached beyond the building itself. Human news networks were broadcasting the event live across their planet, and somehow, signal was being picked up by communication systems throughout the Imperial fleet. Orbiting above, on the bridge of the cruiser, Dark Victory, Lieutenant Sang-Woo stared at his monitoring screen in disbelief. He had been tracking human communications when he discovered the broadcast. What he saw made him question everything he thought he knew about conquest procedures. "Commander Park," he called to his superior officer. "You need to see this." "Commander." Park approached the communication station and looked at the screen. There, in perfect clarity, they could see their supreme overlords sitting in what appeared to be an entertainment venue while humans made jokes about his appearance and methods. "Is this some kind of enemy propaganda?" Commander Park asked. "No, sir," Sang-Woo replied. "This is a live broadcast from the surface. The humans are treating our supreme overlord like entertainment." Word spread quickly through the fleet. On ship after ship, crew members gathered around communication screens to watch the impossible spectacle unfolding below. Many had served the Empire for decades and had never seen anything like it. On the surface, the comedy show continued. A new human had taken the stage, a woman named Dayun, who seemed even more fearless than the previous performers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dayun announced, "I have been thinking about our guests, and I have some questions about galactic conquest as a career choice." She walked to the edge of the stage, closer to Supreme Overlord Kung Su's table. "First question, do you have a human resources department? Because I am wondering about the workplace safety standards for evil Overlord employees." The audience laughed, but Dayun was just getting started. "I mean, think about it. You work for a guy who conquers planets for a living. Your job involves traveling around the galaxy, threatening people. There's probably a lot of overtime. And what happens if you mess up? Do you get written up, or do you get thrown into a space prison?" Supreme Overlord Kung Su found himself actually considering her questions. He had never thought about his empire in terms of employee satisfaction. Most of his subordinates seemed afraid of him, but was that really the most effective management style? "And another thing," Dayun continued, "what is the career advancement path for galactic conquest? Like, if you start as a regular threatening soldier, how do you work your way up to Supreme Overlord? Is there a performance review process? Do you have to take classes in dramatic speech delivery?" The human audience was eating it up, but something more significant was happening. Throughout the Imperial fleet, alien crew members from dozens of conquered species were watching the broadcast and asking themselves the same questions. On the destroyer Iron Fist, a group of maintenance workers from the Zephyr system huddled around a portable screen. They had been conquered by the Empire 15 years ago and had served as forced laborers ever since. "She has a point," whispered one of them, a blue-skinned engineer named Vex. "When was the last time any of us got promoted? When was the last time anyone asked if we were happy with our jobs?" Similar conversations were happening throughout the fleet. Species that had been conquered decades ago began to realize that they had never questioned the system they had been forced into. They had accepted imperial rule because resistance seemed impossible. But the humans were showing them a different approach. They were making the Empire look silly. Back in the comedy club, Dayun had moved on to her next topic. "Now I want to talk about the practical problems of being an evil overlord," she said, "starting with that outfit." She gestured toward Kung Su's elaborate armor that cannot be comfortable. "How do you sit down in that thing? How do you use the bathroom? And more importantly, who helps you get dressed in the morning? Because there is no way you can put all that on by yourself." The Supreme Overlord shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Dayun was absolutely right. Ceremonial armor required 2 assistants and nearly an hour to put on properly. Kia often wondered if there might be more practical alternatives, but the armor was traditional. It was supposed to inspire fear and respect. Instead, it was inspiring questions about bathroom logistics. "And let us talk about your management style," Dayun continued. "You rule through fear, right? Everyone is supposed to be terrified of you. But has anyone ever explained to you that fear is a terrible motivator for long-term productivity?" She began pacing the stage like a business consultant giving a presentation. "Fear makes people do the minimum amount of work necessary to avoid punishment. It does not encourage creativity, innovation, or genuine loyalty. If you want an empire that actually functions well, you need employees who want to do good work, not employees who are afraid of making mistakes." In the Imperial fleet above, these words hit like bombs. Crew members who had spent years doing exactly what Dayun described began to nod in recognition. They had been doing the minimum necessary to avoid punishment for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to actually care about their work. Commander Taman, watching from his ship, felt a strange sensation in his chest. For the first time in his career, he wondered what it would be like to serve in an organization where people were happy to be there, on the stage. Dayun was building to her conclusion. "But here is my biggest question," she said, looking directly at Supreme Overlord Kung Su. "Do you actually enjoy this job? 'Cause from where I am standing, it looks exhausting. You have to wear uncomfortable clothes, give dramatic speeches all the time, and constantly worry about rebellions. When was the last time you had fun? When was the last time you laughed?" The comedy club fell silent for the first time that evening. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Supreme Overlord Kung Su stared at the human woman who had just asked him something no one had ever dared to ask before. When was the last time he had laughed? When was the last time he had done anything simply because it brought him joy? Could not remember. Around him, his guards and advisors waited for his response. In the fleet above, thousands of crew members watched their screens, wondering what their Supreme Overlord would say. For 1,000 years, the Galactic Dominion Empire had been built on fear, intimidation, and overwhelming force. But in one evening, a small group of humans had managed to do something no military force had ever accomplished. They had made the Empire question itself. And the most dangerous part was that their questions made sense. Part 5. The New Galactic Order. The silence in the comedy club stretched for what felt like hours. Supreme Overlord Kung Su sat in his elaborate throne, staring at comedian Dayun, while she waited patiently for his response to her question about when he had last laughed. Around the room, hundreds of humans watched quietly. Above in orbit, thousands of Imperial crew members from dozens of species monitored their screens, waiting to see what their supreme ruler would do when confronted with such a simple but devastating question. Finally, Ambassador Ji Woo stepped back onto the stage. "Your Overlordness," she said gently. Would you like to try something we humans call open mic night? It is where anyone can come up and share something with the audience. Maybe tell a story, perform music, or even try making jokes. Admiral So Young leaned forward urgently. My lord, this is clearly some kind of trap. No supreme overlord in galactic history has ever participated in enemy entertainment. But Kyung-Soo was no longer listening to his advisors. Dayun's question had awakened something he had buried for centuries. When was the last time he had done something just because it made him happy? When was the last time he had been himself instead of playing the role of a terrifying overlord? Slowly, carefully, the supreme overlord stood up from his throne. His cape caught on one of the chair's mechanical decorations, and he had to pause to untangle it. Several humans in the audience chuckled softly at the sight, but not in a mean way. It was the gentle laughter of people watching someone struggle with an everyday problem. I will try this open mic, Kung-Soo announced. Reaction was immediate. Captain Dongwu jumped to his feet. My lord, I must protest. This is beneath your dignity. Perhaps, Kung-Soo replied, but I am curious. He walked toward the stage, his heavy armor clanking with each step. The cape continued to cause problems, getting caught on chairs and tables as he passed. By the time he reached the microphone, he was slightly out of breath and obviously frustrated with his outfit. He looked out at the audience for a moment, then down at his elaborate costume. When he looked up again, something in his expression had changed. You know, he said into the microphone, Dayun was right about this armor. It is completely impractical. A few humans laughed encouragingly. I have been wearing variations of this outfit for 1,000 years, Kung-Soo continued, and I have never once thought about how ridiculous it must look to everyone else. I need 2 assistants to put it on. It weighs more than some small vehicles, and I cannot sit down properly without mechanical help. He paused and looked directly at his cape. And this thing has a mind of its own. I have been in important meetings where I spent more time fighting with my cape than discussing galactic policy. The laughter was growing warmer. The humans seemed genuinely delighted that he was sharing these observations. But the worst part, Kung-Soo said, his voice gaining confidence, okay, is that no one ever told me any of this because they were all too afraid. For 1,000 years, I have been walking around looking like a mobile furniture store. And everyone just pretended it was impressive. The audience burst into applause. Even some of his own guards were smiling now, though they tried to hide it. Up in the fleet, something remarkable was happening. Crew members who had spent decades in silent fear were beginning to laugh at their supreme overlord, but with him. For the first time, he seemed like a real person instead of an untouchable figure of terror. On the communications ship Silent Reach, Lieutenant Hyson turned to her commander. Sir, we are receiving messages from ships throughout the fleet. Crew morale reports are, well, they are the highest we have ever recorded. Commander Wubin looked at the data streaming across the screen. That cannot be right. Run the analysis again, but the numbers were correct. Across the entire Imperial fleet, job satisfaction was rising by the minute. Conquered species were reporting that they felt hopeful for the first time in years. Even the human-born Imperial officers seemed more relaxed and engaged than usual. Back on stage, Kang-Soo was just getting started. You humans have taught me something important tonight, he said. Fear might be effective for short-term control, but it is a terrible foundation for anything lasting. No one does their best work when they are afraid all the time. He gestured toward his guards and advisors. Look at my staff. Ataya are all incredibly capable beings. But how often do they share their real opinions with me? How often do they suggest improvements or point out problems? Almost never, because they are afraid I will punish them for speaking honestly. Admiral Soyoung shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This was exactly what she had been doing for decades. "So, I have a proposal," Kyung-soo announced. "Instead of conquering Earth, what if we tried something completely different? What if we actually worked together?" The audience fell quiet again, but this time it was the silence of surprise rather than tension. "I am serious," the Supreme Overlord continued. "My empire controls 40 star systems, but most of our member species joined because they had no choice. What if we gave them a choice? What if we made the empire something people actually wanted to be part of?" He looked around the room, taking in the faces of humans, his own crew, and the cameras broadcasting to his fleet. "What if, instead of ruling through fear, we tried ruling through cooperation? What if we made decisions together and shared resources fairly? What if we built something better than an empire?" The applause started slowly, with just a few humans clapping, but it spread quickly through the comedy club, and then, amazingly, through the communication channels to the fleet above. On ship after ship, crew members began applauding their Supreme Overlord's words. For the first time in galactic history, an entire empire was cheering for its leader, not because they feared him, but because they believed in what he was saying. Ambassador Ji-woo joined Kyung-soo on stage. "Your Overlordness," she said with a smile, "I think that might be the best comedy routine we have ever heard." Not because it was funny, but because it was true. 6 months later, the former Galactic Dominion Empire had become the Galactic Cooperation Federation. Supreme Overlord Kyung-soo had traded his title for Federation Coordinator and his armor for practical business clothes. The elaborate throne had been donated to a museum. Most importantly, the new Federation's first law was simple. Any leader who took themselves too seriously would be required to attend mandatory comedy classes until they learned to laugh at their own mistakes. Earth became the Federation's unofficial capital, not because of its military power or resources, but because it was where beings from across the galaxy came to remember that even the most serious problems could be solved better with a sense of humor. And every year, on the anniversary of First Contact, Coordinator Kyung-soo returned to the Laugh Track Comedy Club to perform his annual routine about the day he learned that laughter was more powerful than fear. The galaxy had never been happier.